So I am joined today by Nigel. Welcome, Nigel. Thanks for coming in to chat.
I'm pleased to be here.
So we are going to be talking today all things storytelling, video production, freelance, and yeah, really interested to get into all of that. But perhaps we start back at the beginning, Nigel. Did you always want to go into this sort of creative space? Did you always want to go into video? Tell us how that all came about.
Well, it's a funny thing actually, because I think when you start to form ideas of what you want to do at about year 10, I think. And about that time, I was thinking I like the idea of going into medicine.
Okay.
Um, I was really quite good at science and I enjoyed like medical shows. There was a wonderful show in the 80s called Your Life in Their Hands. And I just loved it. It followed the progress of people undergoing sort of breakthrough medical procedures, and very interesting. So I was kind of into that sort of stuff. Um, did straight math science for year 11 and 12 and started to kind of hit my limits. I was one of those people that unfortunately had gone through my whole school career and never really had to study until 11 and 12. And that's not when you want to actually find your need to find a study regime. And so I did okay. And but at that same time, I was messing around with a friend of mine making short films. And we were doing all sorts of things. There was a television program on the ABC, maybe familiar with. It was called Monkey Magic. It was actually done by a Japanese production company, and it got redubbed by the BBC into English.
Yeah. I was going
So,
to say we had it in the UK. I remember. Yeah, I
yes,
remember
of
watching it.
course.
Yeah, yeah.
Little fun fact: the voice of the horse in the second series was actually voiced by Andrew Sachs, who was none other than Manuel in Faulty Towers. But there's also, I think Miriam Margolyes is also one of the voices that was used in the voiceover of that series. So my friend Jason and I like realized, well, they just added on another voice. And I think it was the D generation doing some similar things with older series. And we were, that's funny. And we just started messing around and creating a whole other storyline with episodes of Monkey Magic that we cut together. And that was kind of my first sort of foray into messing around with editing and production. So that I've kind of got the bug. And when I did apply for my courses, I put down as my third choice this Bachelor of Science with Media at Griffith University. And when I did that, I got that course, and when I started, I immediately sort of fell in love with all of the media concentration areas, doing documentary, doing film. I went through the course, getting a grade point average of a distinction through all of that. But my science, it kind of flipped a bit. It took me two goes to pass first year chemistry, which my dad is horrified by because he's an industrial chemist. But yeah, that really gave me the bug. And then not long after that, I got my first job as an editor at a corporate production company in Brisbane. And I was kind of up and flying. My second role after that was actually doing regional TV commercials up in Mackay. It's a great opportunity doing regional TV because you get to do a bit of everything. You're editing, you're directing, you're writing, um, obviously producing. You've got to organize everything. And you really get a whole sense of the production process because you're doing everything. And it's not that dissimilar to what you were doing at, in university in your film studies, because it's a very collaborative process and you have to pivot and do different things at different times, because you're basically it. You really got to improvise a lot. Regional TV stations, of course, they were no different back then. They were a little bit better funded back then, but still, there wasn't the same money. Even then, regional local commercials were effectively done for free by the station to as a marketing ploy to make them appear more local, right? Because they had the ad for the local baker, they had the ad for the local butcher shop, they had the ad for the landscape gardening place, and that, painted them as a truly local station. So then that got them more views, and then that made them more lucrative to the real money makers, which were your Cokes and your McDonald's and your Telstra and all of your big national advertisers. So that was a very interesting sort of learning curve where effectively, I guess it was social media before social media, because that was really what that
Yeah.
advertising was about. Really a bit of a lost leader to get the advertising revenue that they wanted, because he got the eyes on their channel. And yes,
Yeah.
I'd moved back to Brisbane for a while, working at a corporate production place, and then decided to throw it all in and move to London. It was sort of joint idea with myself and my partner at the time. And we headed over there, and very quickly I discovered something really useful in my background. I'd started using nonlinear editing software, Avid, back in, my first go was in 1996. Showing my age. But so when I got to the UK in 2003, they were saying, "Oh, how much experience do you have on Avid?" And I said, "Well, I've got about 8 years." I honestly got the response, "You couldn't have." What I discovered was that in the UK, like, most production had kind of stayed away from nonlinear editing, and they were still doing tape editing right up until about 2000, when they started to change things up. So I found myself at a real advantage that I had all of this experience using the nonlinear technology. So
Can you explain that? What does that mean? Non-linear?
so nonlinear is, back in the dim, dark days, you literally you recorded everything on tape. So you took that tape and you recorded it onto another tape, and you said, "I want that bit, and I want that shot, and I want that shot." So you had to put your edit together in a linear fashion. You had to start at the beginning and work your way through the edit. Now, these days, you might do the end shot. "Oh, I know how that scene's going to work." And then you'll bolt on the
I
beginning
see. Yeah.
later. Well, as you don't have to start at the start anyway, but that has a huge benefit in the fact that you can start with a bit that you can kind of rush through, not rush through, but you know exactly how it's going to work. And it gives you time to think about the stuff, not sure how that's going to fit in. But once you do the bit that's working and that is locked in your head, the story's going to flow really well like that in this section. Then the sections you're less sure of, if they're at the beginning, you can then kind of go back and rework an intro. So nonlinear editing it's like it's word processing for video.
So you were ahead of your time then when you arrived in London.
Yeah, and so I ended up with a couple of really interesting jobs. My first job was with a company called Sport Shows TV, and they were making extreme sports shows for Sky Sports, for BBC Worldwide, for Eurosports. We were doing the Professional Windsurfing Association. We were doing the Swedish match race, which is like America's Cup style match race sailing. And we also did this show, which effectively I was like the series producer for, which was a show called Wild Spirits, which was just cobbled together little snippets of extreme sports. It could be, BMX riding. It could be downhill mountain biking. It could be a bit of windsurfing. It could be skateboarding. It was all sorts of things that were kind of fringe, but visually interesting sports. But we cut them together in a kind of magazine style, bite-sized bits, so that, and really, really very beautiful visually. And this was at the time when Red Bull was sponsoring a lot of this stuff. There was actually a lot of content being made in this area. And so we would get that, and then we'd repackage it and put it out on Sky Sports. So that was a really fun show to work on. And then after that, I was there for about a year, and then the dream job came up. I ended up cutting for the Disney Channel in the UK, and um, that was a really interesting job. It was the first time that I ended up in a situation where I was one of 8 other editors that worked at Disney. And I learned so much from like chatting with the other editors. And it's when I actually discovered that I was a little bit different. I think I found that some of my colleagues, not all of them, but some of my colleagues were very guarded about, well, I know this secret thing and I'm able to, and they kind of like didn't want to share their like special tricks. Whereas I was like, if I found a thing that was really cool, I'd be showing everyone.
Yeah.
And it fostered a kind of trust, I guess, that the other guys were showing me stuff too. And I think there was a really good learning culture there where we were kind of sharing stuff. And some of the guys that were a little bit more hiding their work, you're not going to see my special tricks. They moved on, but it was a really, really great gang of editors there. And
What sort of stuff were you working on? What was the content mainly?
Well, primarily, I was actually cutting promos for their shows like Hannah Montana, Wizards of Waverly Place, we did Phineas and Ferb, all of the Disney cartoons and live action shows of the day. I was cutting promos for. But also, I was working on a lot of original content as well. I think working with some of the producers, I think they recognized that I actually had an interest in that because, well, while I was at Disney, I actually went and shot and produced my own film, directed a film that I went and shot on the Isle of Wight, and was working on documentaries and side projects and a whole bunch of other stuff. So some of the producers actually kind of fostered that and said, "Oh, all right, we need someone to cut our local shows." They had their own version of kind of reality TV shows. So there was the show Camp Rock, which was a Disney movie.
I remember that.
Yeah, Camp Rock. Yes, okay. Well, they did in each of the territories, they did their own version of a reality show called My Camp Rock, where they got people to, send in tapes of them singing. So young people saying, I really want to, and, be a Disney star kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And they set it up as a kind of reality show, and they'd do these different competitions, and the winner at the end would get the opportunity to record a music video, which would then get played on the Disney Channel. So it was a great opportunity to find new talent. It was a great opportunity to engage with the audience. It was in the very first stages where they had like user engagement. You could back then text in each week to nominate who you wanted to give your vote to, that sort of thing. Back in those really early days of reality TV. So, but I wasn't just working on the UK versions. I was working on versions in Romanian and Polish. I don't remember which other ones I did. I think I did work on the Greek one as well. But the one that I remember most clearly was I went through the whole series working with a Polish-speaking producer, and we cut together the Polish version of the series, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. When you're working for a large corporate like that, and particularly, a Disney that's got such a strong brand, from a creative perspective, what's the balance there between your own creativity and where you can take something and what I would imagine are quite stringent sort of brand guidelines of what they sort of ultimately want to end up with? Do you feel you are a bit less creative sometimes in those roles? Like how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, you've just actually reminded me of something that's a really good example of that. mostly you are there to get the job done as efficiently as possible and just sort of cut it. But there's always little bits where even on the lowliest sort of promo that you're cutting, there's bits where you add a little bit of flair. You would have some producers that would come with what we call a paper edit, and they say they want this clip, this clip, this clip, this clip. And sometimes they even actually offline it themselves on their own Avid suites. I worked with Tina, was one of my favorite producers to work with. She was Scandinavian. And so she cut together a clip cut and she'd say, here it is. And I just, what we'd call conform it. So I'd then put all the tapes in and it would digitize all the bits that we were going to use. But then I'd kind of play with the edit. She would say, like, have a bit of a play with it. And sometimes I go, I think it should be a bit faster, or it needs an extra shot, or, just smooth out the edit. But, and those little things happened all the time. But with some of the other shows, so another interesting show that I worked on, original content, was a show called Goalmouth. And it was a kind of kids version of the Baddiel and Skinner Fantasy Football League. Now, you will probably remember that, right? Okay.
I do, yeah. And their excellent England song that came off the back of it.
Exactly right. So to people that not from the UK, there was this, it was for the 2000 World Cup, 99 World Cup or something like that.
Oh, what was it? I think it was was it the World Cup? Might even have been the Euros, because it was the whole Three Lions thing.
Yeah.
I reckon it was 90, I want to say 98, but anyway, yeah, it was the Three Lions, that was the song.
Yeah, and David Baddiel and Frank Skinner are two comedians. So it's a little bit like the Roy and HG kind of thing that was done for the Olympics. It was along those sorts of lines, but they did a little bit more sketch comedy around it. And they were two guys that just loved football, but they do some funny sketches. So Disney kind of thought that's a good thing to emulate, but they got two presenters and they did a kind of kids version, or sort of, they like to call it tween. Sort of young teen, sort of 10 to 13 kind of thing. Aiming at that market, they got very well-known footballer Dion Dublin, who he appears on a lot of panel shows in the UK these days, as kind of their straight guy to their sort of funny man character, who was Gendel, was one of the presenters. And with a lot of this stuff, we were putting together clips that really needed someone with a comedy sort of sense of timing. There were some great sketches where, so the classic thing in after a football game, is that they do the interviews with the coaches, managers, I should say. So the managers are getting interviewed about how well things went, and they did this wonderful sketch, which was Gendel, who was pretending to be one of the journalists. He had, the classic pork pie with like the press thing. And they put some sort of extra shoulder to shoulder, and they had him like he was like in the press corps asking a question. And of course, if you change the question to, what flavor do you like ice cream? And then the serious answer is, in a different context, replying. And I had so much fun, because it was actually the kind of comedy that was created through editing and make it. It was, you were able to use funny things where like a phone would go off in the actual, because, in this press gallery, all sorts of stuff is going on in the background, and we'd be able to play off that. And then it would cut back to Gendler, who's gone, sorry, hello, right? Oh, I'll call you back. and fantastic stuff like that. So with a show like Goldmouth, I actually got to be involved in essentially not so much the writing, but it was almost a devised kind of comedy. Yeah. We're kind of able to experiment with stuff, throw things together. Does that work? Then, we'll take that bit out. It's sort of, that's not really working. And that's when I remembered the really key thing when you're cutting something for comedy is to remember the first time that people watched it. Because the second time you hear the joke, you won't necessarily laugh. So it was very important to be alert when you were playing back those segments to all of the heads of the channel, right up to the head of Europe Disney programming who was there, and just watching their reactions, because that first reaction is absolutely crucial, and you have to remember it. If you don't, then you're kind of lost, because that's such essential data. You've got to grab that, because then you'll know which fits work and which fits don't.
Yeah.
I think that skill there, and that was a lot of fun working on that show.
Yeah, it sounds it. It sounds it. And surprising to me as well, because, obviously my assumption there was that there is perhaps less avenue for creativity in a organization like that. But then I guess it depends actually on the particular show and how something's kind of being put together. There's not one answer. It's actually a bit dependent on the specific show that you're working on.
Look, all of content production, video production, programming, filmmaking, documentary production, 80% of what you do is donkey work. It's media management, it's organizing your shots, it's preparing to do the edit, it's moving the data from one thing to another storage space, it's organizing your project so you can see where everything is really quickly. It's watching stuff through, watching everything through to make sure you get all of the best bits. So I think in terms of video production, it's absolutely essential that you do that, especially if you're Steven Spielberg, you are doing so much work that is repetitive and boring, but you have to watch it through, and you have to see all of the takes, and you have to be attentive to all those little things. But there's a lot of waiting around on a film set too when you're filming. It's all, when you're on a film set, most of it is waiting around and carrying things. And then you get like 15 seconds where you do the take, and then you may do that 4 or 5 times. If on average, sometimes you might do it 20 times, because it's a big setup that requires everything to kind of work together as one shot. But actual action, the actual magic, is this tiny tip of a huge mountain of preparation, of lugging gear, of dressing sets, of lighting, and dealing with funny weather, and editing is exactly the same. Just because you're in Edit Suite, like all that data, all of that footage needs to be prepared, it needs to be set up, and you need to make proxies if you're dealing with very high quality shots. If you're shooting stuff in 4 and 6 and 8K these days, as you might be, you need to create a low res so it's easy to edit with. And all of that is the thing that takes the most time. So it's important to be, patient through all of that process. It's important to be patient through that process and just work through it. But then you got to switch on when it's time to be alert for exactly okay, now how is it working? And so there's a time when you have to be passive, and there's a time when you have to be very, very alert to, how things are going together. And I think pacing yourself through that is crucial to good content production, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned there that in addition to the work you were doing with Disney, you were doing some stuff on the side, you were doing some documentaries and some of your own freelance work. More broadly, what sort of part has freelance played in your career? Because it sort of looks like it's kind of come in and it's come out, and then it's come in and it's come out. How has it worked from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, I think a lot of people that work in, I think all the best people that work that are passionate about content production, they're doing this on the side. They're doing a little documentary, or they're doing a short film, and there's a huge industry of, low budget short films and documentaries that is going on everywhere, and especially at the moment for things like YouTube, but also for some of the streamers as well, because it's an opportunity to get content, to make cost-effective content, and sometimes it clicks and it's, oh, we'll take that, thank you. But the great thing about low budget stuff, passion projects, making short films, is that everybody on the crew gets to step up a level. Your assistant DP gets to be the DP. Assistant directors become directors. Assistant producers become producers. Lighting assistants become heads of lighting. Everyone steps up, and it's an opportunity to flex your muscles in a role above what your day-to-day working is. And it's a huge learning curve. You're going to learn so much more. Like I spent 10 days shooting a film, which is not so much a short film, but they used to call it an intermediate. It ended up being, the first cut was like a 25-minute film. I cut it down to get it under 15 minutes in the end. But that was 10 days of filming on the Isle of Wight with a cast and crew of over 50. We had one set piece where we had a party to shoot, and it was, it was our version of the Deer Hunter, wedding party scene. So it's quite elaborate, a lot of stuff going on. And the wonderful thing, as I say, is that you get to be immersed in a problem-solving situation. You've only got one chance of doing this. You have to step up roles. You are very much in the deep end, and you very quickly work to rely on the people that you're working with. You realize how important your producer and DP are. That sort of triangle. As a director, your producer and your DP are your kind of the two voices on either shoulder that are helping you make the decisions to go forward. And I was very lucky to have a very good DP and a very good producer working on that show. And thirdly, I actually had a very, very talented first AD who was a friend of mine who had a wonderful background in theatre, and he was pivotal in a last-minute change where we decided to shoot a party scene on the island. He got on the local radio, and immediately we had all these extras from the Isle of Wight turning up and he had the skills to wrangle those and get them working in the right kind of way in the background, so the shot worked really, really well. So the great thing, as I say, with these kinds of side projects, is you get to work a lot harder, but you learn so much, and that is where you actually get to excel. I think we talk about lifelong learning and these days, but for filmmakers, it's those passion projects that are actually our way of pushing that, and you're learning by trial and error. And I learned so much doing those projects, I think.
Yeah, I can see that, as you say, the opportunity to kind of try stuff out where you're not sort of operating necessarily in the same confines that maybe you are in that sort of 9 to 5 scenario must be, just really cool and super interesting. And also I think surrounded by people of a similar mindset who are wanting to be part of something, wanting to challenge themselves and wanting to create something at the end of the day must be really nice as well.
I think it's a really special privilege. Like I say, I had over 50. I had the core of the crew were about 15 people, and then with all of these extras, we had over like 50 people. Not one single person on that crew were getting paid. I was paying their expenses. I was paying for them to be put up on the Isle of Wight. I had to, hire all the gear to do it. Took out a mortgage to do it. I took out a personal loan to do it.
Yeah.
But but no one's working for money. You're doing it for
Mm.
expenses. And I think, and not to mention, of course, and I haven't even mentioned like the amazing cast that I was able to find for that short film. Some of whom have moved on to doing great things on the stage. And yeah, I'm really. Uh, it's such a privilege to work on those projects, to have that many people working for your creative vision
Mm.
free. And I think, wow. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, as you say, it's pretty special actually, isn't it, to
amazing.
have that opportunity.
Mm.
Listening, what happened after where does one go after after Disney? At some point you found yourself back to
Yeah,
Australia
so
as well?
after Disney, my Disney time finished in 2012, and I was doing a little bit of freelancing in the UK. Actually, it was really starting to come up. I was getting more and more bookings. I worked on a very interesting show. I worked on Loaded TV for a time, and I met
Mhm.
the editor who cut the film The Crying Game. He's a guy by the name of Kant Pan, and he actually won the Academy Award for working on the editor of The Crying Game. And he's such an amazing guy. And there we were doing this lad TV kind of,
Yeah.
and and I think that's where it's like amazing where I mean, it was just the guy that was doing it had some money and was sort of trying to capture that live TV vibe that had happened, I think, sort of late 90s, early noughties. And he was trying to recapture that. But that stuff was meeting a person like Kent in this really unusual
Yeah.
environment was another, like, sometimes the job, what you're actually working on, you get a lot out of it that's not necessarily the end product, which was, let's face it was Lad TV and it was like,
Yeah.
but so I was at that time, my mum was not well, and I decided it was time to come back home. And I didn't exactly have a plan, but I had like I'd been away from Australia for 10 years by that stage. And I really wanted to reconnect with some of my friends and former colleagues that I've worked with. And so I kind of did a bit of a sort of backpack year. And it just so happened that when I was, meeting up with a friend of mine who happened to be former programmer, brilliant coder, language expert, linguophile, as they say, he had made the decision long ago to kind of forgo all of the trappings of a high-end programming role. And he was currently working in a backpacker lodge in between traveling. He basically is a professional traveler and travels the world constantly. And Andrew is one of my closest friends, and he's an incredibly interesting guy. Just the fact that he made that decision. But
Yeah,
when I was,
absolutely. Yeah.
it's extraordinary. Yeah, yeah. He was like one of the top programmers back in at the height of the sort of .com bubble, if you like. And then when that all kind of fell apart and he lost his job there, he decided, you know what, I got all this money. He then traveled for like 5 years based on that money, and then came back and realized that he could just do odd jobs and
Yeah.
and go and travel again for another 2 years
Yeah.
in places. But it was that time when I was meeting him in the local Bondi backpacker hostel that I met his boss, the assistant manager of the hostel, Laura, who became my wife. So
No way.
having met up, that changed my trajectory a little bit.
Yeah.
And I started to say, well, okay, what's the industry like? So this was effectively the third time that I'd started from scratch.
Mm.
I just, got onto this various sites where you can kind of say, yeah, you do this as a freelancer. But in these industries, you're always working on, people like to work with the same people because
Yeah.
it is such an intense process, whether it be on a shoot or whether it be in an edit. You are, like it's like being, it's like being in battle. It's
Mm.
like a war footing. So it's so essential that you're with people that you trust and you can rely on. And so people do tend to work with the same people. So in this industry, it's the thing that you shouldn't do. But I managed to do it 3 times, starting obviously from pivoting from my size, just getting the industry from out of uni, then starting again from scratch when I moved to the UK, and then starting again from scratch when I moved back and find some work in Sydney. And that was
It's interesting though. Sorry, I was just going to say it's interesting though because I totally agree with you, and I think there's so much value in. Obviously, I've done it myself, going to another country, and the experience of doing that. But it is a key point that I think often gets forgotten, that you are essentially starting again, and it's not easy. And I think a lot of people underestimate actually how hard it is. But I also think the flip side of that, the skills that you learn from having gone through that, and I was going to say resilience. I know it's a bit, probably a bit of a trope to say, oh, yeah, it makes you resilient, but it does. And
I
also
totally
the
agree.
skills, yeah, and also
You're
the
right.
skills that you learn around how to start again and how to take control of that process as much as possible, and actually what you can do to influence that outcome, I think is really really important. So interesting to hear you say that, because I often think that side of it can get forgotten amongst the kind of the glamorized of, oh, I moved to London, and oh, I moved to Australia, and great, but the flip side is it's hard.
Yeah, and look, it's like anything, like deciding you're going to start your own small business, you're going to start a restaurant or a cafe or something like that. You have to make a plan. You're not going to make any money, maybe, or make enough money for 6 months. It's going to take time to build up, and I think that's always the case with any business you might start, and freelancing is no different. But it's not rocket science. You've just got to break yourself out of that being sort of scared and not reaching out to just calling people, trying to arrange coffee meetups with people, reconnecting with the people that you do know in that area. And look, I think you're right. I mean, I think those experiences of starting again, essentially in different countries, they were so rewarding, because you're building something, you're building contacts, and you're building a rapport, and then you get to a stage where you get to work for the Disney Channel. I mean, new. And I think that is so important to embrace change, especially these days, because I think as we go forward, the length of time that you spend in a full-time role is getting shorter and shorter. There's no doubt about it. I mean,
Oh, definitely.
I think we're now at the stage where if you've been 2.5 years with a company, you probably need to start looking for your next challenge. And it's just because of the way that the industry is, the turnover. Gone are the days. Long gone are the days where you get a job for life with a company. But then that was never the case in the film and TV and video production industry ever, really. It's an industry that thrives on freelancers that are able to pick up jobs at short notice. Now, it can be very lucrative because you're getting paid for the fact that you're on call, and that, so you don't, 2 days work a week is in fact, you're doing all right kind of thing. And that's, and so of course there's the trade-off that you're getting, a little better rewarded, maybe less so these days. But look, to be fair, and I know that people are very critical of the way the industry is going at the moment. What's come right down is the overhead. When my very first edit job at Real Image in Brisbane, we had an AB roll edit suite, which has got all of the tape decks, like a mini studio in a TV station. Well, the edit suite I cut on was like $250,000 worth of gear, Australian dollars. When at Mabel, I set up a full edit suite and cameras and everything for under $20,000. And that's where the industry has come. The gear the equipment is becoming almost disposable. And that means that what shines is your ability to storytell, your ability to organize a shoot, your ability to schedule the post-production and get the product done as quickly as possible. This is before my time, I want to point that out, but in the early days of TV, the guys that were doing editing were actually wearing white lab coats, and they were like technicians, they were scientists, right? They had to be boffins to run this kit. And now the kit we're at the stage where we're in the AI world, and think what you want, and things are now created at the speed of thought. Tech that we're dealing with. And I think that people are a little bit scared of AI, but I think it's really freeing for a creative person that your connection with the end product, your journey from beginning to end is this much shorter. You don't have to wade through a whole bunch of technical things. So I'm one of these people that are very positive to the future in the industry.
It's interesting because I thought that before, actually, when you mentioned something about YouTube, and that was kind of my thought process of the landscape has changed significantly. The barriers to entry, as you said, are so much lower. I mean, even just in a really basic sense, the way I edit this podcast and put a video together, it's, I'm not a professional. I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, but you can come up with a really, a pretty decent product with no real experience and kind of, figure out how to make it work. And that's a completely different world to, as you were saying, back with a $500,000 worth of specialist equipment to be able to edit a video.
But I think, and I think we have to change, so you are a professional because you have that professional vision to how you want it to turn to end up.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you.
I think some of the craft skills, and look, that's maybe the lament. I mean, there's purists like Tarantino will continue to shoot on film because he loves the craft of, it's a little bit like developing film is a little bit like, working with pottery and ceramics. When it comes out of the kiln, you're not quite sure how the glazes are going to fire, and it's a bit of a surprise. And similarly, when you develop film, there's a lot of craft to getting what you want, but when it comes out, it's that process that's a little bit of wow. It's this randomness that comes into it, and people are kind of, I guess, clung to that craft. I don't want to say clung. I mean, and that is, it is a wonderful thing, but the craft is moving in different ways. I think that need to be innovative and inventive and problem solve is just shifting into different areas. And there's just so much more you can do in the digital world that you could do. It's the biggest difference is for a single operator now, for a single freelancer, whether they're a videographer, a director of photography, an editor, a producer. Single operators can do so much more now with the tools that we have available. And that's the only thing that's changed, I think.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's made us all directors and producers, even those of us that weren't, right? Because we now have that ability to program what we want to create from scratch without having to wade through a complex technical that needed like specialized learning. I mean, it's opened it up. There's that great quote. I don't know if you know the film Apocalypse. There's the film Apocalypse Now, you've probably heard of, but there was a wonderful making of documentary that Eleanor Coppola, his wife, put together. It went to rave reviews at the Cannes Film Festival in 89, 90 or somewhere around that time. And it was behind the scenes of making Apocalypse Now, which is a little bit crazy. And there's a wonderful quote because she was shooting Super 8 films and interviewing the people behind the scenes. She interviewed Francis. And his last thing that he says in that making of documentary is that my hope and dream is that one day some little girl from Idaho with a handy cam is going to make a masterpiece. And I really think that we're actually living that reality now with YouTube, with all of the technology that we have.
But it's a really key point though, isn't it? It's kind of that, what's the phrase? Almost like the democratization of it, that
Yes.
almost anyone, if you've got an iPhone, you can make a film essentially.
Yes.
And so it actually becomes about, like you said before, it becomes about the story you want to tell, the idea, and being perhaps innovative in different ways, perhaps about the way that you see the world or the way you think about something. But that sort of, that barrier to entry is gone, essentially. And I suppose it's interesting. I suppose how you think about that can be either a very positive thing or not, depending on your disposition, probably. But as you say, I think it's actually a really exciting proposition and a really exciting time, certainly from a technology perspective, an exciting time to kind of be alive, because the speed and the rapid amount of change creates a really interesting opportunity for everyone. It just depends how you approach that, feel about it, want to use it. And I think, I like your positivity around that that take.
Yeah. We just have to embrace change.
We haven't really got a choice, have we? It's either embrace it or kind of get left behind, I think.
Where you need to be focused is on what you want to achieve, how you want it to look. Making it look like you want it to look is getting easier all the time. And being aware of those different technologies. Gosh, the drones that they do with shots, with point of view shots, a lot of when we in a film in the old days, we had these things called jib arms, which would, give you rising camera shots and all that sort of stuff. It's a piece of kit that needed 3 operators.
They're pretty hefty, aren't they? Like
when on tracks, it took you hours to set up for a quick 15-minute shot. And now a guy with a point of view drone that's like a little mini drone, you can use that. And I've seen it done in like warehouse situations where you just get that up there and you get a lovely traveling shot through the warehouse. And that is replacing this jib arm and track that would have been a day's setup to do it. And it looks just as good, if not better. I mean, it's shot in 4K. So, I mean, the stuff you can do is only really limited by your imagination. So I think it's great where the industry's going. I don't really have that trepidation that some people have.
Yeah. And as I said, I love that. I love that kind of positive take on it, because I think you're right, but also I think it's to some degree a choice which way you want to see that. And it's nice, it's refreshing to hear your take on that. I think also that is a nice place to finish. But as always, we will finish with our final question, which is always our final question. And interesting what we've just been talking about there. I don't know if that's going to impact your answer, but is there something that you know now, Nigel, that you wish you knew then?
I thought about this a lot. I think the situations where I've been in work, where I thought I knew a better way of doing things, but I didn't speak up. And I thought, I'm only this kid. I wasn't someone who wanted to kind of get my elbows out and sort of go, do it this way. I was, believe it or not, I was a shy, less confident fellow in my early days. And I think if there's one thing is with the benefit of hindsight, I think actually that was a good idea. I should have been more vocal with it. So maybe it's sticking my neck out a little bit more. I think that's always something that I think that in a more corporate situation, you are kind of you're kind of discouraged from that. It's a little bit like Big Brother, be the low profile, keep your head
Don't
below
rock the boat.
you know, duck your head down, low profile, cruise through, and you'll win Big Brother. I think a lot of corporate offices are a little bit like that. But by the same token, when you can do things a little bit better, I think you need to be a bit braver. And I think that there's maybe people are less inclined to do that these days, but I think that's where maybe I could have demonstrated I kind of or help myself better in different situations, being a little bit more vocal, a little bit braver to back myself at different times. And yeah, but I I think that on the whole, I'm not someone that has a lot of regrets.
And actually, it's interesting because whilst I like the question, because I think it's interesting the way in which different people answer it, I'm the same as you, that I don't really believe in regret, because I don't think there's really, obviously within reason, there's, any such thing as a quote unquote wrong decision, obviously within the boundaries of legality or whatever, because even if you made the wrong call, you learn something from it, you adapt and you move forward in a slightly different way. So yeah, I appreciate where you're coming from there, because I don't really
And
believe in
they
it
come out in
either.
the
But
school system too, don't they? I mean,
yeah,
our kids are not encouraged as they were to make mistakes. And I think that having the opportunity to make mistakes is I mean, it gets back to my, side projects, passion projects.
yeah,
That's where I had the freedom, because I could just say, oh, let's do it this way. And it's really rewarding when it pays off. I think maybe we should be a little bit more like that in our kind of corporate roles, where we go, you know what? I think we should do it this way, and this is why.
yeah. Be a bit braver.
Be a bit braver. I think it doesn't hurt
Yeah,
to be a bit braver. Um, you know, my role as a producer and as an editor is often about giving options to the client, to whoever is I'm working for, and there's never any danger in presenting these options. And I've always done that. But sometimes you've got to go, you know what? You should really do this, and this is why. Maybe be a little bit more forceful.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I think that when those things work, you can maybe get a little bit more noticed for your abilities at those times. This is the opportunity to sort of stand up, and I think that we should be braver.
Yeah, I like that. That's a nice message to finish on. Thank you, Nigel. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experience and what you've learned and your positive hopes for for the future of technology. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.